So, good morning, everybody. Just note we are recording this so that I can post it on our website here later for folks that can't join this morning. If you're not a speaker, would you please mute yourself? So, we've got three speakers this morning. I'm going to start with some results from the small plot variety trials and some other things that I want to talk about in terms of just planting notes, getting ready for planting. And then Scott Haley is going to talk about his variety database website that's super helpful. And then Eston Mason is going to talk about some new varieties. So Scott is a former wheat breeder from CSU and Eston is a current wheat breeder. So thank you both for agreeing to speak this morning. So I'm Sally Jones Diamond. I'm based out of Akron at the USDA station, but I am a CSU employee in the Department of Soil and Crop Sciences. I run the crops testing program. And I'll go over our program here just for a moment. So my program does not just work with wheat, although wheat, I would say, is probably 40% of our program. We test a lot of different grains, forages, and even some oilseed crops that are either currently grown or have the potential to be grown, mostly in eastern Colorado. And my goal is to extend unbiased information to farmers and ag professionals. So that's my goal today. So as part of that program then, we do the official variety performance trials. So those are small plot replicated trials. We have 13 dryland sites for winter wheat, and we have 3 irrigated sites. And Eston's crew and my crew work together to get those planted and harvested each season. We also do agronomy trials and other stuff. And so for an example, in 2023, we worked on 11 different crops and we had over 60 trials at 25 sites. So we are mostly on farmer fields and somewhat on research stations. So with that, I'm going to dig into some dryland recommendations for winter wheat based on some trial results. I want to point out that our winter wheat variety performance trials report, the wheat book, the latest edition is out. You can access it at csucrops.org. It's on our winter wheat page there, and that's just a 30-page. It's got all the different trial results from this year, along with a couple agronomy notes and some characteristics tables on the different varieties that were tested in the trials. So if you want to pull that up, you're more than welcome. It's you can follow along. A lot of what I'm presenting today is in that book. And if you want a hard copy mailed to you, shoot me an email and I'm happy to mail one to you. So first place I look when I'm thinking about variety recommendations and yield is the 3-year trial average that we publish. So the varieties in the 3-year average, they had to have been in our northeast and southeast, so north and south of I-70 trials, all 3 years to be included in this table. So the one we're looking at right now is based on 19 sites over the 3 years. And looking at this, the top varieties, that's a better predictor of how a variety will perform on your farm next year than looking at a single year or especially a single site, because there's just so much variation from year to year with our growing environment and across the locations. Just 1 mile can even make a huge difference, and I think you all know that. So it's better to have as much data as we can built into that. So this is all from our small plot replicated trials. So each location has 3 replicates. So talking about the varieties there, you can see Monarch. That is our top yielding variety. It's 109% of the overall average. That took over Langan as the top yielding variety in the 3-year average. And then you can see there's an experimental there from the CSU breeding program, that's also a hard white. Eston, I think we'll talk about that one when he's talking about new releases here in a little bit. And then in the hard white category here, we've got Whistler from Plains Gold. And that's very similar yielding here to another CSU experimental that Eston will talk about. And then Cropland has CP7017AX, so coaxium. Those three did really nicely. And Avery's not far behind there. So also I just want to point out that we do percent of trial average on the test weights as well. So you can see all these are average or above average with exception of Whistler. And then we've got protein over here. So the average protein for those 3 years was 11.7%. And so that 297R hard red has really good protein compared to the average. Okay, so then move into Southeast and Northeast trial results. These are also, well, these are actually 4-year results, and I've pulled this table from Scott's variety trial database because I don't publish 4-year averages, but he has that option in his database. So this is just Southeast locations, I-70 South. This is based on, it's only 9 replicated trials from the 4 years because we've had drought down there. So you can see this Cropland 7017AX, that's a coaxium again, did very well. That's very similar to what we saw in the 3-year average across all the sites. Then we've got Eston's 2 experimentals here. One of those is a hard white and then the hard red. And then we've got Monarch and Whistler there in the next 2 spots. And Scott also does percent of average for test weight and grain protein. So again, that 297R is just kicking butt on protein and test weight as well. So that's a very useful tool. Yeah, and really awesome. And I just want to point out here too, Canvas has a really nice grain protein as well. So then looking at the Northeast, we've got a lot more trial sites because we've just had a little bit more rainfall in that region. So this is also looking at the last 4 years. Monarch has done really well. So the top 3 yielding varieties are all hard whites. And then we've got Crescent AX there that's not too far behind, and Langan. So Langan's holding in there with Crescent. And this 297, and even Bird's not doing too bad there. So those are all solid options there from a yield standpoint. So I'm just talking about yield and test weight and grain protein right now, and I'll get into the characteristics a little bit more here in a minute, but I just wanted to kind of give you a short list. And then another way that I like to look at the data and give you variety options because there's so many variety options. And maybe you know you want just a hard red winter wheat or you want a hard white, right? Like you may not care solely about just yield. You want to think about market class and some other characteristics that might be useful for you. So on the left side of this table, we have so we're moving down our decision tree here from a hard red. You can do herbicide tolerance or not. So in the herbicide tolerance category, we've got our Clearfield double genes and then our coaxium varieties. And so all the varieties in this decision tree have done average or above average in our 3-year trial average, or in the 2-year if it's a variety that has a special characteristics that I think it should be included in here. So Bird CL Plus is what I've got listed for the Clearfield double gene. I knocked Brawl out because Bird is just better yielding. And then in coaxium, I split it by maturity. So in early maturity, we've got Crescent AX, and medium, we've got Cropland 7017, and then Kavari. And so when there's more than one variety listed here in a category, they're in order of highest to lowest yield. So that 7017 AX is higher yielding than Kavari in our 3-year average. So if we look at just regular hard red winter wheats that don't have the herbicide tolerance there, we've got our sawfly tolerant varieties. And so Amplify SF from Plains Gold and AP Solid from AgriPro Syngenta are the two that I have listed. I kicked out Fortify SF because yield mostly, and also it's not as solid as these two. And so AP Solid here is an example of it's not in the 3-year average table because they've only been testing it in the Northeast sites, but it's done very well. And so it's something to consider if you have sawfly issues. And then if we just look at regular old hard red wheats, I've broken those apart by maturity. So we've got medium late, we've got Whistler. Under the medium maturity, we've got Avery, Bird, and Canvas. And then in early maturity, we've got Langan. And then over here on the right side, I've got some hard whites. These are all premium. Not all of them require a contract through Ardent Mills with their Ultra Grain Premium program, but they can all get a premium. So Monarch, Snowmass 2.0, Breck, and then Wyndham SF is a white with sawfly semi-solid stem for sawfly tolerance. Okay, so now in the vein of dryland still, I want to talk about our on-farm test strip results. And so these are large-scale test strips. They're not replicated within a location, but they're replicated across locations. So every farmer in eastern Colorado has the same 5 or 6 varieties, and then I get all the harvest data back from the extension agents and the growers, and I combine all that, and I'm able to do analyses on that and get some really, really awesome data. And then it allows the farmers to see new varieties in their fields. So this year we had Kavari AX, again, a coaxium. We had Amplify SF with the seed treatment from Indigo Ag, and then Amplify SF just plain with a regular seed treatment fungicide. Everything had a fungicide seed treatment like Cruiser Max. And then AP Solid, Guardian, and then KS Territory. And so everybody had all those 5 varieties, 6 treatments. So Kavari AX was top yielding, and Amplify with the Indigo was not different yielding than Kavari AX there. But what I want to point out here is that our LSD, so that's the least significant difference, is 1.5 bushels. And so if you're looking at this Amplify with and without the Indigo seed treatment, that is not significantly different yielding between those two. So, but Amplify SF plain is different yielding than Kavari, which is why it's not bolded. So just the top yield group there is bolded. And then
Hey, Sally,
yeah, go ahead.
can I ask a quick question? Do you
Sure.
know how, like, how much does it cost to treat with that indigo seed treatment? Because you're gaining, let's say, 1 bushel an acre.
Yeah,
If it's a real bushel,
I
does it
think
cost
it's
more
like
than?
$5. They do it by hundredweight, and I think I want to say it's like $4 or $5 a hundredweight, but that's a guess.
Okay,
And it
so
was a dry seed
roughly
treatment.
roughly $3 an acre or something. Does that seem right, or does that seem
Well, if
low?
you're
It seems
planting
low to me.
like 50 pounds an
Yeah.
acre, yeah, it'd be like
Okay.
$2.50 an acre.
Yeah.
And I will say that the biggest, being full disclosure, the biggest pain in the neck is if you're applying a biological, usually there's some sort of requirement or request from them that you, after you treat the seed, and you have to treat the seed pretty close to when you're going to plant because they want the biologicals to still be active when you plant it. And so like when we planted all the cough seed, they wanted us to keep the seed in a cool place. It couldn't get over like 80 degrees in the shop, and so there were certain things like that. And then try and plant it within 7 to 10 days, which may or may not be feasible depending on how many acres you have to plant. So I wouldn't discourage anybody from trying it. It's just that's the data we have. So we've got test weight and protein there too. Again, Amplify had pretty good test weight there, and Cavari was not significantly. Actually, yes, it was significantly lower than Amplify. And AP Solid had really awesome test weight there. So, and then again, there's protein there if you're interested in that. And so I just wanted to highlight, we do these on-farm test strips every year. This year we're trying something new. We're going to add in a few irrigated sites, like 8, I think. So we're going to have 2 sets of cough trials. We're going to have the dry land. This is our tentative list of varieties for this year is Amplify and Cavari and AP Solid again. We're going to get this new hard red from the CSU wheat breeding program that's done really awesome, along with Whistler. And then the irrigated, we're looking at Canvas, SY Wolverine from AgriPro, and then 2 experimentals and Monarch. So if any of you have an interest in having these varieties on your farm, you have to plant and harvest them with your equipment. And then like the picture there, we come at harvest with a weigh wagon and we get the weights and samples and do all that. So if you have any interest, let me know.
So you still are actively looking for sites for the cough trials this year?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always willing to add each year, so.
Okay, just thought I'd check.
Yeah.
So you had 18 sites. Was that harvested sites, like with data?
Yeah, that was harvested. Yeah. So we put out, I think 23 or 24 sites last year.
And those had a wide range in yield. I looked at them recently.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking 10 bushels to 60, 70, or I mean, if you don't look at the irrigated sites.
Yeah, and we did have 1 irrigated site there last year, so
cool.
That was our first test of that. So I'm going to quickly go over some forage recommendations, or I guess not so much recommendations, but just highlight that we've been doing forage trials the last couple of years. And so if you have an interest in that, we do have data now. Last season, we did it at Akron, Burlington, Orchard, and then there was a smaller trial in Southwest Colorado at Yellow Jacket. And so at Akron here, since we were on a research station, I threw in a triticale and a couple of hybrid rye mixed in with our wheat, forage wheats, and some regular wheats. And so you can see our dry matter yield there. We harvested these when each entry or variety reached early heading stage. Then we'll dry out the samples and get all the forage quality. I cut off that side of the table, but there's all sorts of information there on the forage quality. And then we took the rest of these plots for grain harvest just for fun. The idea kind of being like, if you're in a soft lie situation or just drought or whatever, and you want to cut your wheat for hay instead of taking it for grain harvest, you can kind of get an idea of how it would do. So we put in Amplify SF, even though it's not a forage variety, just to get some information on that. And SY Monument is the same. That's technically not a forage variety, but it did just fine. So just want to highlight that we have that data there. And then this is our data from Orchard. Since that was on a farmer field, we just had wheat there. We don't want to mix in triticale or hybrid, definitely not rye out there. So yeah.
I'll make a comment on, we did have Ray. We didn't have it in the regular variety test this year, but when it was in last year, we actually baked it, and and it actually has better than average quality. You know, I think
Oh,
it's a
good.
4 for milling and a 4 for baking as well. So it
Okay.
actually has pretty good quality for a forage variety.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, and then for the few folks that are irrigated or interested in irrigated recommendations, we also have a 3-year summary table in the wheat book here. And so it's funny that 297R just doesn't matter if it's dryland or irrigated, it is just doing awesome. So
It's consistent.
yeah, that's great. And then Monarch and this experimental white, so those are both hard whites, 007 there, did really well. Let's see, what else do I want to say? Crescent AX and CP7017 AX are both good options. Obviously, those are coaxium varieties. And for regular hard red winners, Canvas is a good choice right now until we get seed availability of that 297R. And then again, if you want Clearfield Bird CL Plus, would be a good option there. And so I did the same thing with irrigated as I did for the dry land. I have a much smaller decision tree there, looking at hard whites, hard reds, herbicide or no herbicide tolerance. So you can look at that there if you'd like, but I'm not going to go through that one. And then this table came about because I had got a lot of questions from growers on part of what goes into the decision of what they want to plant sometimes is whether or not they're allowed to save back seed to replant on their own farm the following season. And so I asked Laura Pottorff from, she manages the Carta seed programs at CSU. She knows everything about the seed plus. And so she put together a larger table, and from that I just pulled a short list here of varieties where saving back seed is not allowed. And so if it's not on this list, then and I've talked about it, and I've talked about it in the trials today, then you're able to save back seed for use on your own farm. This does not, there are different rules if you want to sell seed, and so this does not apply to if you want to sell seed. So Amplify SF is one I wanted to point out that you cannot save back seed yet. That will expire in summer of 2027. It'll sunset, but right now you can't save back seed. AP Solid from AgriPro, you can save back seed. And so then any Clearfield or Clearfield Plus or any coaxium variety, because of those herbicide tolerant traits, you can't save back seed. You got to sign a stewardship agreement on those. Snowmass 2.0 is the same way, and then Wyndham SF is also certified seed only. So I just wanted to point that out. And then in that vein, for the seed growers, Carta Seed Growers Association, on my website there on csucrops.org, and then they also have a website on CSU proper. They put out a fall seed guide every year, and so it has a list of all the varieties that are available for purchase of certified or foundation or registered seed in Colorado. And so they'll list not just Plains Gold varieties, but AgriPro, Westbred, Lima Grain, and then even some Kansas and Nebraska varieties as well. So that's a really good resource. I use that all the time. And then I'm going to close out with just a quick reminder of agronomic tips, things to have at the forefront of your mind, I guess, when you go into planting. And I've got Tyler Benninghoven and I. Tyler is the agronomist for Plains Gold. We kind of revamped an article that Jerry and I had for a few years just on things to remember when you're planting. And so this is a subset of that article that's in the report. Planting more than one variety on your farm with different agronomic qualities so that you're reducing your risk. So varying the maturity, disease tolerances, right? Like wheat streak mosaic virus, if you know that might be an issue, then getting a variety that has really good resistance and putting that in places where you've had that as an issue. And then leading into that is controlling volunteer wheat and weeds, not only to avoid soil moisture loss, but also to get rid of that green bridge for wheat curl mite vectored viruses such as wheat streak and also triticum mosaic virus. We saw a lot of that around Akron this year. It was pretty bad at the station. Just scouting your fields whenever you can, especially right after planting, and then again in early spring. Problems are easier to fix when you catch them early, and even better if you can prevent them. So in my intro slide there to this section, you saw some cutworms. Cutworms were pretty decently bad this year, this spring, in fields, and so those are something that we can control for. I also got a lot of questions about spraying insecticides for wheat stem sawfly control this summer. Don't do it. It won't work. CSU's done research on it and don't do it. It's not worth the time and it's not worth the money. And then lastly, this is my little soapbox, plant seeds per acre instead of pounds per acre and know the seed size of the variety that you're planting if you can. So in that wheat book, I've got an article on pages 23 and 24 for 2 drill calibration options. One of them, you do not have to know your seed size to get your drill calibrated to plant in seeds per acre. And then some seeding rate suggestions based on your planting conditions. So and then with that, I'll just throw my email, my cell phone number up there. If you have any questions, please feel free to call me. I love getting calls from growers and I welcome it. So with that, I'll take any questions if anybody has any. We'll leave some time here at the end for more of a Q&A or discussion after Scott and Eston talk, but if there's any quick questions now, pipe up.
Sally, I had just one more. I had a comment and I put it in the chat, but when you were talking about looking at multi-year data and how from, environment to environment, things can really differ. And I just want to point out that the quality of data can also really differ from like site to site, year to year. We try to have, we definitely have some standards of when we report data or not. But in some years, we might get 10, 11, 12 sites. And in some years we get half that or even less. A couple years ago, we had like 4 sites or something that actually survived. And so that's another reason it's really important to look at multi-years, because in any given year, you may only have a handful of sites that are giving you quality data.
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make that comment.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, Scott, I think you're up.
Okay, do you need to unshare your screen or go ahead and share mine?
Yeah, go ahead and share yours.
Okay.
There you go.
Can you all see it?
Yep.
Okay. So I apologize. My screen's over here and my camera's over here. So excuse me all for looking away here. So thanks for the invitation to present, Sally. After you asked me to present, I got to thinking this database in its current form has been online for a little over 10 years now. I think it was like fall 2013, and this is the first time I've done something like this. So hats off to you for putting this together. So where I wanted to start here was on the main database page. So everybody can see that, right? Wheat Trials database up top there. And so when we first put this up online, the URL or the web address for this was ramwheatdb.com. I think as many people will recognize, I retired a few years ago, So, and I've tried to, in my retirement, I've tried to kind of broaden the scope of the database beyond just CSU RAM data. So, I took kind of found the name Wheat Trials, but people can still find the database either at wheattrials.com or ramwheatdb.com. So what I'm going to do today is go through these four main functions, and hopefully you can see with the mouse over there. I don't know if I'm seeing my mouse red as yours was.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, good. So these are the four main functions of the database, and I'm going to go through each of those. But before I do, I just wanted to point out a couple things. I try to post on the database main web page when I finish, or even when I'm in progress uploading the data from a certain program. And so you can see back on June 26th, I finished uploading all of the Oklahoma State trial data. I probably started that back in early to mid-June. So we're still waiting for the current year's data. We're still waiting on South Dakota and Montana. And so people coming into the database, you can kind of see from time to time how I'm coming with uploading the data. So just very quickly on the bottom in the footer there, that green bar across the bottom of that appears in all of the pages. If anybody needs to contact me, you just click on that contact us link. I say contact us, but it's really just me. And then if you want to see how other people are using the database, see what kinds of searches people are doing, or see what searches people were doing back in August or October of 2013, you can access all the page stats, all the searches going back to 2013. It does not log who made the search. It just logs what varieties were searched and what regions in terms of multiple location summaries and so forth. So where I wanted to start with was the wheat variety information tab. The data source for all of this is, given that I'm retired now, I just peruse all the PDFs that are published from the state variety testing programs, and not all of the programs do as good a job as CSU does in terms of publishing a wheat variety characteristics table. So I access those data for the private data. Sometimes those are kind of hard to get, but I do my best to keep these up to date. But it's probably not perfect. So if somebody sees something they don't like, not that you don't like, but something's missing, let me know and I can look into that. So there's two basic ways that you can search here. One is searching by variety, and that you see up there, and we'll just go ahead and put in which ones did I have. I said, we'll just look for Kavari. So one of the things I wanted to mention here, you see that list of varieties scrolling past. There's well over 250 varieties. Eston asked me in the chat box, when do I put a variety into the database? Well, a variety automatically goes into the database when the variety testing data are made available. But in terms of when a variety appears here in the list of varieties, or when a variety appears as an option in the head-to-heads, that's a little more subjective. As I'll show you in some of the outputs, special kinds of varieties like Clearfield, Coaxium, solid stem, forage varieties, hard white wheats. There's kind of I don't want to call it a bug, but a peculiarity in the database that in order for me to show that this particular one, for example, is a Coaxium, I have to make it so that the variety appears here. So I don't know if that answers your question. I think, Eston, the bigger issue for me is when to remove it. I mean, there's 250, well, more like 280 odd varieties in this list, and that's just way too many. And so I try to think, okay, when does a variety come into the trials, and I keep track of that. And after a variety hasn't been tested for a few years, I'd like to remove it, but we all recognize that maybe some producers are still growing that variety. So there might still be some value having that variety, that a producer could search for the variety characteristics for that variety. So that's why we have so many. But you can make this a little simpler. You see all this list. If I just type K, it works this way on a Mac. It goes to all the Ks. I don't know if it works that way on a PC, but we have Kavari AX, and the other one I wanted to search for was Amplify. I just type A, and you can do up to 5 if you like. And we're just going to do it 2. And you can pick a form or a tabular type layout. You can go back and forth between those, so it doesn't really matter which one you pick. you can go back and forth. So I'll just jump ahead. We're going to come back in a little bit to searching for based on the variety characteristics.
Hey, Scott.
But let's, yeah.
Brad here. Hey,
Yeah.
on when to take them off, do you think maybe you'd want to look at some kind of time frame with the variety surveys? If a variety hasn't hit the survey for, I don't know, 5 years, there's pretty good variety surveys in Oklahoma, Kansas, and Colorado that if varieties haven't been on the survey for a certain amount of time, you can take them off.
That's a good idea. Yeah. That involves one more thing for me to do, but yeah.
I know,
I
but
can
you
do
asked
that.
for a way to take them off, so.
Yes, that's good. So one of the other things I didn't mention, thanks for the question, Brad. In the bottom of the footer down there, you can see that wheattrials.com is supported in part by the Colorado Wheat Research Foundation. I forgot to give that plug. So the Colorado Wheat Research Foundation for a number of years now has supported the hosting. Like this is, I don't have the computer in my home office here to serve the database. It's in the cloud somewhere. That costs money. And so Colorado Wheat Research Foundation supports that. And then they also provide me a little, we can just call it an honorarium to help me keep me interested and keep me in the game in my retirement. So thanks for that support. So let's just go ahead and do that comparison there between Kavari and Amplify. I think were the two that I picked. You could pick whichever ones. So this is the form-based layout. It shows some basic information. Where's the variety from? When was it released? So on and so forth. A couple years ago, I added this where a tech sheet, variety information brochure is available. You'll see that link here. And so I'm just going to click there. And this is Colorado Wheat's or Plains Gold's variety tech sheet for Amplify SF. So I do that where they're available. And that also takes a fair bit of time because people update them all the time and they move the locations of them. But I do my best to keep those up to date. So you can toggle through them. So clicking down here, record 2, go to previous and next if you like, but this is just kind of hard to get information from. One of the things I'd like to point out is the characteristics that you see here. What is a 1? What is a 7? So I have a little link there, show the key for trait scores, and this pops up. And it's kind of small on my screen, but essentially early, short, and good, like good resistance is like a 1, and late maturing, tall, and poor resistance would be like a 9. So if you kind of forget what's what, you can click there. So we can click there and go to the tabular view. And this is where we just, because I only compared 2 varieties, this is what we see here. And hopefully you can see here when I toggle over each of the columns, the color changes to green. And so you can click the column and sort. You only have 2 varieties, it's not that big a deal, but you may do a search based on variety characteristics and you got a bunch of them and you want to see which ones have better resistance to leaf rust or whatever. So you can sort based on the columns. And so that in essence is that. Here where we see the type of the variety, the class, hard red winter, hard white wheat, and the type being those special kind of traded type varieties. So let's go back to the wheat variety information now. And Sally had commented earlier about coaxium varieties. Well, you can do that sort of search. You want to search for all the coaxium varieties, and you can just do that search. There are no white ones yet, but these are the different kinds that you can just search. Restrict your search based on that. We'll just kind of bypass that for the moment. I wanted to just do a search. Say a producer wants to have an early heading wheat, which has a good stripe rust resistance, like a 1 to 3, and good wheat streak mosaic virus resistance, 1 to 3. You specify those 3 traits. You could restrict it to, okay, give me only the coaxiums that meet the criteria, or only the hard whites that meet that criteria, but that information is in the resulting table. So I would pick tabular layout here, and oh, look, nothing came up. There's nothing in the database that's early, good stripe rust resistance and wheat streak. So one point I wanted to make about this is kind of keep your searches broad, right? You don't, Eston will be the first here to recognize that there are no perfect varieties. So if you enter gee, I want a variety that's resistant to anything, this is what you're going to see. So I'll just click the back button, and you see, at least on my Mac, those criteria were preserved, so I can just change one of them. So let's look for the medium maturing, medium heading varieties that have good stripe rust resistance and weed streak. And oh, look, a number of them come up. And again, you can see that all the heading there, sorting based on heading, they're all between 4 and 6. Based on stripe rust, they're all between 1 and 3. And based on, I forget what the other characteristic was, the weed streak is over here. Okay, so they're all less than 3. So I think that's kind of handy for just kind of getting a sense, you sense of the different varieties. So you notice that there's a lot of blanks, and I do my best to fill those up, but it kind of depends on whatever data I can find and what's available. So that's it for the variety characteristics. Let's look at the single location trial data, and the input here is a little bit simpler. And I will just echo what Sally said previously, that you know, I'm really not that interested in a single location of data. It's not the best predictor. In fact, it's the worst predictor, but it is a function of the database. So let's just pick up Colorado here. So once you pick one of the data sets, right, I'm picking Colorado, then what appears in the trials, which is really the location, is all the ones that are in the database. So let's pick Burlington, for example. And then after specifying Colorado and after specifying Burlington dryland, only those years that are in the database are available. You see there were no 2024 data from Burlington this year. So I'm going to click 2023 and then click display. And this is the trial data from last year, from 2023 from Burlington. The same thing that we see here in terms of yields, test weights, proteins, together with the percent of trial average. One of the things you might notice here is that you can toggle or mouse over the varieties. You click on Monarch right there, and you get this pop-up that pulls up, shows what that form-based layout for the variety characteristics, which I think can be kind of handy. But again, you can sort any of those columns that you see there. The ones that are appearing in bold colors here are the ones that are in that top LSD group. The LSD value is reported down in the bottom of the table. And so 107 minus 5 includes then everything there from Valley on up. So one of the things that you can see here, Sally was talking about protein earlier, and try to find, we'd like to have varieties that are higher yield and higher protein, but they tend to be inversely related. But you just see, for example, at this single location, LCS Steel AX was top yielding variety in the trial, but its protein was 105% of average. So again, that data could just be an outlier from that one location. So protein is one of those variety characteristics that you can search for. So that's all I'm going to spend in terms of the single location data. The multiple location data and the head-to-heads, I think, are really most useful. And again, coming back to Sally's idea that more data, the better. The worst predictor is a single location in a single year. And the best predictor, though still not that great a predictor, but the best predictor is more locations and more years of data. So this is pretty simple. You can see all the different sources of data. All of the irrigated trials I have stuck down at the bottom, and just kind of separate them from all the dryland trials. But there's data from Kansas and Nebraska and Texas, so on and so forth. But let's just go ahead. I had looked at, let's see, what was the search I was going to do? We do 2024, 2023, 2022, and we'll specify both the Northeast Colorado and Southeast Colorado locations. And what you find is the same data table that Sally produced earlier. So one of the things that I want to point out here is that you notice none of the yields are bolded here. This is not a statistical analysis, so there's no LSD value. So we can't say, based on these data, was Monarch statistically higher yielding than this other variety. Those would be a little bit more complicated data analyses to build into the database. I'm not going to go there. So I just wanted to point out these are simple arithmetic averages of the available trial data. So again, you can sort these. The 297R, Sally pointed out earlier, again, higher yield. but the protein, 103% of trial average based on the available data. So, so that I think is useful. One of the things that people might do is see, okay, well, here's how Whistler does in this particular set of trials. Well, what happens if I add in the Panhandle of Nebraska into that? So you can go back. Let's just say I'll add Panhandle of Nebraska. Let's forget about the Southeast Colorado. Let's see how well this does just in the more northern High Plains locations. And you notice you get a much smaller set of varieties because there's so many differences in terms of, over 3 years' time, the consistency of varieties being entered in all those Colorado trials and all those Nebraska trials is not very high. So these are the only ones that are in common. So while you can then incorporate other regions into your search, it does then tends to restrict things a little bit. Okay, so that's all I think we really need to show. It's a pretty, in terms of multiple comparisons, it's a pretty simple input. It's a pretty simple data input. So this is the head-to-heads. Head-to-head, it's kind of the similar structure in terms of all the different data sets that one can do. And here again, you see this big long list of varieties that appear there. And I was going to highlight, let's just do bird. I'm going to type B, go straight to all the birds, and then we're going to do Langen. I didn't want to show favoritism to anybody's hot variety, and we'll just pick up Northeast and Southeast Colorado there, and then click display. So pretty quickly, it goes and grabs all those data. And so the first thing, again, all these columns are sortable. Let's just sort by year. So Sally pointed out that the database allows you to do a multiple location summary for 4 locations, but also allows you to access data going back beyond 4 years. So Bird and Langen in the database were head-to-head going back to 2014. So 2014 to 2024, up here at the top, they were head-to-head 91 different times. And then it makes a comparison, just which one was better a higher percentage of the time. Langen was better in 55 of those 91 trials, or 60% of the time. Bird was better for test weight, 57% of the time, and so on and so forth. So so you can again then just sort them based on the region, Northeast, Southeast Colorado, if you like. You could restrict that in your comparison too. So the last thing I wanted to show down here is some other statistics. It shows what the overall average is. Averages are for yield, test weight, and protein. And the bolder, I should have noticed this. Let's sort this table based on the bird average. So here you have bird, sorted by all the bird values, right? And from 113 bushels, these are dry land, down to 26. You notice the ones that are in bold, that shows where that particular variety was higher yielding, not necessarily statistically so, just numerically higher yielding. And the first thing that jumps out at me is look at all the bolds here for Langen at this higher yield levels. These are the higher yielding trials, higher yielding variety performance, and Langen at those higher yields tended to be higher yielding than bird. So again, this comparison may not be that great of interest anymore, but it may be for other varieties that you might pick. So then going back down to the bottom, you can see that the overall average, it highlights which one, that Langen averaged 66. And then it does a statistical test called a paired t-test based on those values. And this shows that those differences for yield are significantly different. Test weight, again, a protein, doesn't take a rocket scientist to tell you, they're both 11.5 pro. But sometimes you'll see there may be 3 or 4 tenths off, and they will be statistically significant. Okay, so that's what the overall average is. And then percentage of trial wins. This then shows what the percentage of the time that variety was in that top LSD group among all these locations. And 56% of the time Langen was in the top group, 37% of the time bird was. So this for me is yield stability, or one measure of yield stability. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to show is this grain yield regression plot. And this, again, regression is a statistical procedure, but essentially it just plots those individual variety yields on the y-axis, that's what's called entry mean yield, and plots that against, well, what's the average of all the varieties at each of those individual locations. You can mouse over, here's a Langen data point. Langen is blue, and there's a location where the average of the trial was 100.6 and Langen was 87.5. Now that's really not that interesting, but essentially what regression does is it plots the best fit through these data points. And then in this particular example, you can compare the response of the varieties. And I don't want to say 9 times out of 10, but what drives the average yield of a location in the high plains in particular is moisture availability. There are other factors, of course, related to that, but it's by and large moisture. And what this shows you is that the lower yielding locations, these lines are right on top of one another. So my argument being is that would be Bird and Langen have equivalent drought stress tolerance. And in this case, Langen just tends to be a little bit more yield responsive at the higher yielding locations. Okay, so that's it for you can do that for test weight. I tried to actually do this for protein, and I haven't been able to do that yet. I'm not a great coder. I'm better than I was a few years ago. But here you can see that Bird tends to have higher test weight than Langen. So hopefully someday I can add a protein regression plot. So that in essence is all I have. Hopefully I didn't take up too much time, Sally. I'd be happy to entertain any questions that people may have.
You're fine. Yeah. Tyler had a question for either you or Eston. After varieties get released, how long do you continue to update characteristics, and where does that data come from?
Well, all the data come from whatever the state variety testing programs are publishing. And, when they publish their books, Nebraska's got a book. Oklahoma hasn't published data, like on variety characteristics for a number of years. And Nebraska publishes it. Kansas has a really good one, actually. And so they come from your program, Sally, and from what Eston does for you. And so it comes from the public programs and then the private programs where they're available. They're just a little harder from the private programs. And then another thing that you see, and it's really not that big a surprise, well, what do we do when, the public program says the test weight of this particular variety is, scored as a 1, or scored as a 5, and then the private company says, no, it's a 1. So some subjectivity comes into updating the data, but things like test weight or protein, I do statistical analyses based on the data. So I feel pretty good about those. But then for company says that, okay, this variety's got a 3 for stripe rust, well, you'll see some variation depending on the different scores, for that particular variety for stripe rust. So I take an average, and nobody from the companies has pushed back that, hey, how come you have our variety scored as, susceptible to this? All of our data says it's really resistant. And well, Kansas says that it's susceptible. So nobody's pressed me on that yet.
Right.
So I don't know if that answered your question, Tyler.
And then Zane had a question for you. Are the results on wheat trials database exclusive to small plots, or would replicated large plots be acceptable?
It's only the official state variety trial program data. So those are small plot data. I do not have any, Sally showed the data from the on-farm test program. None of that is in there. None of Kansas's county demo plots, I think they call them, none of that is on there. So they're all from replicated trial data. So the Lima grain and the Syngenta data that you'll see in there, we go back here and you look at database main page. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen anymore, but you'll see that Syngenta and Lima grain, I added those in early August. Those come from Leighton Emke's wheat varieties from the Great Plains book. And Syngenta publishes LSD values, so I have those in the database. Lima grain does not. Lima grain just posts averages, trial averages. So short answer is there are no large strep trial unreplicated trial data. if it'd be easy for me to add. I asked somebody recently, well, should I add this state's demo plot data? And somebody said, no, they're crap, don't bother. So, but if enough people said, hey, that'd be really interesting to do, it'd be easy to add.
Okay, I was just curious, Kevin, in the past, and I plan on continuing, we add an extra 10 varieties to the cough plots every year. We have 2 replications of each.
Mhm.
Didn't know if that data would be useful to you or not, since he would get stuff from kind of everywhere and gather that up.
Well, I think that's the conversation we can have. I think, I have all of Kevin's past reports. It'd be pretty easy for me to go back in and access those. So
I figured you did, but I thought I'd mention it
Okay.
/ ask the question.
Okay. Thanks. Nice to meet you, Zane.
Nice to meet you as well.
Okay, thank you, Scott. All right, with that, I'm going to have Eston talk.
Just gonna share my screen here.
Yeah.
Maybe. Hold on. Mhm. Hold on. Technical. I'm moving. I got 3 monitors in my office, and I'd rather it kind of be in front of me. Okay, can you see that?
Yeah.
And we'll go into presentation.
It's
Are y'all
showing
seeing?
its presenter view.
Let's swap.
There
How
you
about that?
Yep.
Cool. All right. So I'll try to be quick. We only have 15 or so minutes. But Scott told you all the important stuff, and Sally as well. So I'll reiterate a little bit of what they said and talk about a couple of new varieties. So, when I think about breeding targets, it's kind of similar to, how you think about selecting a variety. And Sally showed that kind of web of variety decision tree. And that's kind of how I operate in the plant breeding program. So I first think about, okay, what's my target trait? Because every trait is going to influence my selection criteria some, and also, how strict my selections are. So whether that's coaxium, solid stem, Clearfield, or white wheat, each of those has different needs. And like Scott said, we'd love to have the perfect variety in every case, but that's not always the case. And so you have to give a little bit depending on the needs. Then grain yield would be next. Quality for me would be next, which we try to put out good quality varieties so growers don't have to think about that as much. There's at least 20 traits that I could look at for quality. I focus a lot on mix time, water absorption, and low volume. And then agronomic traits I put in at 4th. Really, that's about kind of getting rid of the extremes. So if something is really, really late or really, really early, out of the adaptation that we want, those will go. And if something has really poor straw strength, that'll go. There's not a whole lot of trimming I have to do there, to be honest. From a maturity standpoint, a lot of our stuff falls into a pretty tight window, and you want to have some difference, like a Langen versus a Whistler, stuff like that. Virus resistance would be after that. So this focuses a lot on wheat curl mite. We have a virus complex out there, and I'm going to show a little bit of data, kind of how that's changing. And so we used to have a lot of wheat streak, and now we have almost no wheat streak. And we have Triticum mosaic virus now. And then we also have, what we've been calling a yellowing disease or a yellowing virus. We don't know for sure what's going on, but that's something to be aware of. And then stripe rust resistance after that. And I kind of put that last just because you can spray for it. And, in the breeding process, if you have good agronomy and you have good virus resistance and you have good stripe rust resistance, a lot of times grain yield will take care of itself, and those will fall into that high grain yield group. And so, yeah, perfect variety for me would have all of these characteristics. So just a couple things about this kind of yellowing disease we've been seeing. So this is a little bit different from, what we think of in terms of typical, Colorado wheat streak mosaic virus. This is something I've seen since 2021. I first saw it in Julesburg in 2021. And then I've gotten ratings at Akron and Burlington, as well as Lamar over the last 3 years. But a couple of pictures here, so it's really a lower canopy thing, and you see it in April and May. And so you would think wheat streak, but it's really a brighter yellow kind of color. I've got 3 leaves here in this right picture, and I don't have a ton of experience with wheat streak, but I would say this far right leaf maybe is kind of typical wheat streak. This far left leaf is more of this bright yellow virusy kind of thing we're seeing. This one in the middle, I'm pretty sure, is Cephalosporium wheat stripe, which is actually a fungal pathogen. So this is kind of what we have to deal with out there, trying to identify these diseases and rate them. But over the last 3 years, this kind of yellowing disease, this is what I've seen the most by far. So yeah, you'll get this kind of lower canopy infection, and then the wheat can kind of grow out of it from what I've seen. So something like Amplify has susceptibility to this. But you look like in Akron this year, early on, I saw it, you come back, the canopy kind of grows out of it, and Amplify still performed really well in the trials. And so, yeah, trying to wrap my head around what this is, but it's different. We hypothesize, myself and Robin Roberts hypothesize it's related to Triticum mosaic virus, but we're still unsure. We have identified a major gene that is controlling it. One more picture. This is kind of above the canopy, and if your screen lighting looks okay, you can kind of see down in there just yellowing leaves down in that canopy. We sent some samples this year for virus testing. I sent some to Kansas. I sent some to the lab here at CSU. Kind of a similar story. They all come back positive for Triticum mosaic virus, and we get a decent amount of High Plains mosaic virus showing up as well. But no wheat streak. So you can see here, no wheat streak. So even on things like, for example, we've talked about this 297R. These were taken at Akron, and it had no virus symptoms at all. But you still see some positivity for High Plains and some positivity for Triticum, even with no virus symptoms. We are getting some data back which will quantify the amount of these different viruses. So that'll be something interesting to kind of look at following up on. But yeah, even in, lines, so this 20037R, this has a new gene, WSM3, which gives resistance to Triticum, supposed to give resistance to the whole complex, right? But you do still see some High Plains showing up in there. WCM would indicate that the line has wheat curl mite resistance, as a lot of our material does. So yeah, still trying to figure out what's going on with viruses, what's going on with this yellowing disease. So we'll work on that. Like I said, though, we have identified a major gene that's gives us resistance, gives us susceptibility, depending on which allele you have. And one thing I did was go back and kind of look at our different traded wheats, right? And how susceptible or resistant are they to this yellowing disease? And what we see is in our regular hard reds, hard whites, that Scott had built this great germplasm, he had almost completely selected against this yellowing disease. So only maybe 2 out of 10, which would be in red here. Red is bad, blue is good, green is we're not exactly sure. Yeah, only 2 out of 10 would have had this virus gene, the susceptible allele. It's about the same in the coaxium stuff, same in Clearfield, but when we brought in that solid stem germplasm, that's when we get this increase in frequency of this bad allele. And then when we really see it is in our sawfly plus coaxium and sawfly plus Clearfield material. So only, let's say, 3 out of 10 would not have this yellowing disease. And so we've been able to kind of get rid of the susceptible material moving forward. But this did, put some, we had to throw out more than we would have liked to, I'd say. So more on this to come as we figure out things moving forward. Last couple slides, just touching on a couple of releases. So these, we had a CWRF meeting a couple days ago, and to kind of officially name these varieties. These names are tentative, but so this 297R, we've been talking a lot about this line. So this is a doubled haploid from 2 Colorado breeding lines and Monarch, and we've seen Monarch right at the top of the trial with this line. So it's interesting. It's an on hard red, medium height, medium kind of maybe late maturity. One interesting thing about this is the long coleoptile, and I think this could be one reason that it's done really well over the last few years, because we've been so dry. It's able to maybe get going. It does have, decent straw strength, better than a lot of our Plains Gold material. Does really well, high yielding, whether it's dry land or irrigated, as Sally mentioned. It's just a stable performer. And that's why it stayed around, and that's why it got released, and that's why it's, potentially has will stay in the Plains Gold brand. It was also #1 in the Southern Regional Performance Nursery, which is tested across, 10 states maybe, in the region, maybe 30 locations of data. And it was #1 across that. Good milling and baking, good stripe rust, and it does have resistance to this yellowing disease, possibly associated with Triticum mosaic virus. Tentatively, we have named this variety Sheridan. Burl, if you're still on, I saw you on earlier. And one of the reasons was me and Brad and Tyler, when we were at the field day this year, we're walking the plots, and that plot this year was tough. It was, you had really even stand, but a really, really hard winter and a really, dry spring. And so it was a good measurement of toughness is what we determined. And this line, I tried to find a picture of it. I hope I have one. It looked incredible. And then if you look at the data, it was #3. So it wasn't at the top, but it was right up there. So visually it performed like we thought it would visually. And so we've tentatively, this line has been named Sheridan. Last here is the irrigated results. So it's #1 in the irrigated trial. A couple bushels better than Monarch. And let's see, compared to Canvas, you're gaining about 5 bushels over the last 3 years. Last slide is this hard white. And this is a cross between 2 Colorado breeding lines. This -F5 is a parent that is also present in Snowmass 2.0. Kind of medium, medium height, medium maturity, medium coleoptile. It has very good straw strength, like a Monarch or better type straw strength. Again, very high yielding, whether it's dry land like we see here, it's #2 right there with Monarch, or irrigated, #3 right there with Monarch. Excellent milling and baking. So from a quality perspective, it's better than Monarch. Kind of falls in between a Breck and a Snowmass 2.0. So not quite as good as Snowmass, but better than Breck, better than Monarch. It does have BX70E, which gives strong mixing. Again, it just has resistance to this yellowing disease. It is susceptible to stripe rust. But if you're growing kind of high input white wheat, potentially get sprayed. So I'm going to quit there. We do have 4 new lines getting released this summer. And I'm going to defer on talking about those now, just for the sake of time, and take any questions you might have. Oh, this white wheat, tentatively named Telluride, which I think is super cool. Question, Roger.
Eston, I have a question. So the 297R, will you incorporate that over to a solid stem at some point in time?
Yeah, I mean, it's been crossed definitely to solid stem material. So I wouldn't say it will be completely converted. We don't generally do that because it takes a long time to, let's say, just back cross in that solid stem locus. And there's no guarantee that doing that will result in a semi-solid stem. If there's anything I've learned, it's that having that solid stem gene, it's only a starting point for solidness. So you need other, probably smaller effect and the right background to get solidness. And so every year, yeah, we take our best hard reds and we cross them to our best solid lines, semi-solid lines. So we do, I mean, we already have lines that are in, probably preliminary yield testing that have this parent, this 297R as a parent with solid stem material in the background. And so it's there, it's coming. But we don't generally completely convert something. That's just not the way a forward breeding approach works.
Okay,
Great question.
Do you have a replacement for Amplify then in the works?
Yeah, absolutely. We had a couple semi-solids in the trial this year. One that did, from a yield perspective, better than Amplify, better than AP Solid, better than Fortify. I'm not 100% sure that its level of solidness is good enough to replace an Amplify. It does have weak curl mite resistance. It does have yellowing disease resistance. And so there's good traits about it. I just need a little more data to see if it's solid enough to replace an Amplify. Because Amplify it has some deficiencies, but it's very, very solid. So it's an 18. It's the best we have for solidness. It's a little bit more solid than an AP Solid, a lot more solid than a Wyndham or a Fortify. So I'm going to stop sharing just so I can see people again. Yeah. So it's a balancing act, one thing I've learned with selecting for solidness is you actually kind of have to not select for yield, because if you select for yield, you're going to indirectly select for low solidness. And so yield, it really becomes almost a secondary trait initially with these solid stem lines, just to make sure they have enough solidness.
Well, we had Amplify out this year, and of course we had thick stands, so it stood really well, but you could tell in the thinner stands, we still had SOFI pressure there.
Yeah, I mean, these are semi-solid, right? They're not, you're always going to get a little cutting. I think we just need to accept that. If we go full solid, there's just not going to be enough yield left.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think we need to, depending on the pressure that's there, you're going to see, even in an Amplify, even, in anything that's available right now, you're going to see a bit of cutting.
Okay. Thank you.
Justin?
Yep. Brad.
The Sawfly rating in the characteristics table, remind me what that's based on. And do you think if, as we get more and more Sawfly varieties in the mix, do you think at some point we could have a 5 to 25 number be listed in that table rather than a 1 to 9 scale, or would that not be as good, or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah. So what I do, I reshared. So, yeah, this is y'all can see the characteristics table. So that is based on cutting. And so we don't take just solidness ratings across the variety test as a whole, because there's just so many hollows in there. It's a waste of time. So what I try to do is things like an AP Solid. I have that in an internal check in my breeding nursery. that gets sampled for solidness every year. And so we get data on solidness now. And what I try to do, so that WSS, this is based on cutting. Over here in the notes, I will put in generally what the solidness is. So if we go to amplify, yeah, so amplify here I have as a 17 out of 25. I don't have it for AP solid because I didn't have enough data, but I'll have that in that note moving forward. So I try to put that as a side note here as opposed to in the table. I mean, if we move to like, you know, total half or solid or something like that, it would make sense. But as of right now, we just don't sample the variety trial because there's just not enough in there to make it worth the time. We can assume that anything that's hollow is a 5, even though that's not the case. They do differ a little bit. But yeah, I'm just going to try to incorporate that into the notes for now, and we'll see moving forward.
Okay, it might just be something we need to talk about at field days to growers of where to find the number, because I think,
Sure.
you know, everybody looks to the table, and the table is what ends up in the wheat trials database. And so when we only have the solidness number in the notes, it's just not quite as readily findable by growers, I think. But it's kind of top of mind for them a lot, I think. Well, we've done a pretty good education out there, it seems like, because you'll get questions about, is it a 12? Is it a 18? What is it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe the cutting
right,
rate is more important though, because it's across all varieties, and you can incorporate more than just the solidness score when you list the cutting rating.
Yep. Yeah, it's something to think about, Brad, for sure.
Okay.
It would just be a lot of missing data and a few data points. And we'd have to take out another column, so we can maybe take out like stem rust or, you know, something that's not important maybe for Colorado. Because we're running out of room, I guess.
Yep.
Great question. I will say on those 2 new releases, so there is foundation seed available of those 2. So there was foundation seed produced last year that is there and available if anyone would like to pick those up.
Any other questions? Okay. Thanks, everybody. I'll put the recording of this up online here probably by tomorrow. So
Yeah, thank you, Sally, for putting this on.
yeah, thanks. All right.
Thank you.
See ya.
It was good. Have a good